3 months ago, Nora Belwyn was thrown into a dungeon cell as a death sentence locked with a chained wolf that everyone believed was a feral beast. But that wolf was Dominic Crow, the Lycan king, cursed and trapped in beast form by conspirators who wanted his throne. Through one impossible night, Nora's compassion broke the curse that should have been unbreakable. The mate bond between them transformed a condemned Omega into a queen and a cursed beast back into a king. Together, they reclaimed the throne and built a kingdom on the foundation of their love. But curses made in dark magic demand payment. Now Nora is pregnant with twins heirs prophesied to either unite or destroy the Lycan race. The ancient entity that powered Dominic's original curse returns during the blood moon, possessing him and severing their mate bond. Lady Thorne's exile was a lie. She's raised a supernatural army to capture the unborn children for ritual sacrifice. As possessed Dominic hunts his own pregnant mate, Nora is smuggled to a hidden sanctuary. Alone and heartbroken, she has one chance: survive until the twins are born, because only their birth can break the possession and save the king she loves. Haven't seen how their epic love story began? Watch part 1 now, to see how a condemned Omega and a cursed king found each other in the darkest dungeon and changed their world forever. 3 months of peace had transformed the Lycanthian kingdom in ways that seemed almost miraculous. The scars left by conspiracy and betrayal were healing, slowly but steadily, under the careful guidance of their restored king and his Omega queen. Nora had grown into her role with a grace that surprised even those who had witnessed her courage in the dungeons. She was no longer the uncertain servant girl condemned to death, but a sovereign who had earned her crown through blood and impossible courage. Her Omega wisdom helped mend divisions between factions that had formed during the regent's corrupt rule. She moved through the palace with quiet confidence, her gentle presence in council meetings tempering heated debates before they could escalate into conflicts. Dominic ruled with strength that had been tempered by his mate's compassion, his decisions balanced between the iron justice of an alpha king and the mercy Nora brought to every situation. Together, they had become what the kingdom needed, a partnership that proved strength and gentleness were not opposing forces, but complementary powers. Their bond was celebrated throughout the land, spoken of in taverns and noble houses alike, as proof that the old prejudices between alphas and omegas were not just wrong, but wasteful of the potential that existed when both natures worked in harmony. The palace had never been happier. Gardens bloomed under the attention of staff, who no longer feared arbitrary punishment. Children laughed in courtyards where once only whispers of conspiracy had echoed. It was in this atmosphere of hard-won peace that Nora discovered she was pregnant. The palace healer confirmed it on a bright morning in early autumn, and Nora's joy was so profound she wept. Dominic, summoned immediately to the healing chambers, lifted her in his arms and spun her around with a laugh that was pure, unguarded happiness, a sound the palace had never heard from their normally composed king. Within hours, the news spread through the kingdom like wildfire. Their beloved monarchs would have an heir. The Crow bloodline would continue. The future was secure. The celebration lasted 3 days. Bonfires lit the night sky. Wine flowed freely in every tavern. Noble houses sent gifts from across the kingdom, ancient cradles carved from sacred wood, blankets woven with protective blessings, toys crafted by master artisans. Then Nora went for her first detailed examination, and everything changed. The healer's hand stilled on Nora's swelling belly, her expression shifting from routine professional assessment to shock. "Your Majesty," she said slowly, "there are 2 heartbeats. Twins." Nora was carrying twins. The celebration intensified briefly. Twins were considered especially blessed, a sign of the moon goddess's favor. But the palace archivist, an elderly she-wolf named Alara who possessed knowledge of texts most had forgotten existed, requested an immediate private audience with the king and queen. She arrived in their chambers carrying a book so ancient its pages crumbled at the edges, bound in leather that had gone black with age. Her hands trembled as she opened it, and when she found the passage she sought, the color drained from her weathered face completely. The prophecy of the twice-born. Ilara whispered, her finger tracing words written in a language that predated the current kingdom by centuries. Twins born to a true mate bond that survived an impossible curse, conceived in the aftermath of breaking dark magic through love's power alone. She looked up at them with eyes full of ancient fear. Your children carry unprecedented power, your majesties. Power that exists only once in a millennium. Dominic moved closer to Nora instinctively, his hand finding hers. What kind of power? Ilara read directly from the text, her voice shaking. They will either unite the fractured supernatural world, bringing peace between all magical species, and ushering in an age of harmony that will last 1,000 years, or they will destroy everything, sundering the barriers between worlds, plunging all into darkness and chaos from which there will be no recovery. The silence that followed was suffocating. There must be middle ground, Nora said, though her voice lacked conviction. This one is not. Ilara's bluntness carried the weight of certainty. Your children will tip the balance of the entire supernatural world. There is no middle ground, unity, or destruction. Those are the only paths. Within days, strange signs began appearing. Magical practitioners from territories they'd never contacted sent urgent messages, claiming they could feel the twins' presence across vast distances, a pulse of power that resonated through the magical currents connecting all supernatural beings. Ancient enemies of the Crow bloodline, silent for generations, began stirring, and in the distant shadows beyond any kingdom's borders, in a tower built from obsidian and bound with chains of dark magic, the curse crafter who had created Dominic's original imprisonment felt the twins' awakening power and smiled. Malachar had been waiting for this moment. The ancient entity he served demanded payment, and the prophesied twins would provide currency beyond any simple soul. The blood moon rises in 3 months, Malachar whispered to the darkness. And when it does, the debt will be collected. In the palace, Nora placed her hands on her belly and felt her children moving already strong, already powerful. And for the first time since emerging from that dungeon cell 3 months ago, she felt true terror. The throne room was filled to capacity for the weekly public audience, when the temperature dropped so suddenly that breath misted in the air. Every candle in the chamber guttered and died. Darkness fell like a physical weight. Then the shadows at the far end of the chamber began to writhe and coalesce, pulling together into a shape that was almost human but fundamentally wrong, in ways that made every instinct scream. The figure that emerged was gaunt to the point of skeletal, draped in robes so dark they seemed to absorb light. His face was hidden beneath a deep hood, but when he spoke, his voice carried power that made the very stones of the palace tremble. Every Lycan in the throne room dropped to their knees not from respect, but from pure instinctive submission to a predator so far above them in the supernatural hierarchy that their bodies reacted without conscious thought. Guards collapsed, nobles pressed their foreheads to the ground. Even children stopped crying, frozen in primal terror. Only Dominic and Nora remained standing. The mate bond flared between them like a shield, their combined power providing protection their subjects lacked. Dominic rose from his throne, placing himself between the figure and his pregnant mate. Who dares enter my throne room uninvited? I am Malachar, the figure said, and I come to collect what is owed. I am merely a servant, a conduit for an entity older than your precious Lycan race. He moved forward, gliding rather than walking. The curse that trapped you in beast form, did you truly believe it was my creation? The power came from something far more ancient and terrible. And such power demands payment. Nora felt ice forming in her stomach. What payment? 1 royal soul. That was always the price. Malachar's voice dropped to something almost conversational, which made it even more terrifying. When this Omega Queen broke the curse through the mate bond, she didn't destroy the magic. She merely disrupted it, delayed the payment. His hand emerged from his robes, pointing directly at Nora's swollen belly. But now, with the prophesied twins growing in her womb, the entity has decided to collect what it's owed, with interest. The throne room was silent except for terrified breathing. During the next blood moon, which rises in precisely 2 weeks, the entity will come to collect its payment. One royal soul must be surrendered willingly, offered in conscious sacrifice. If this payment is not made, he spread his arms wide, the entity will take them all. You, King Dominic, your Omega Queen, and most especially those unborn children whose power calls to darkness like a beacon. 4 souls instead of 1. Dominic launched himself at Malachar with supernatural speed, but his hands closed on empty air as the sorcerer dissolved into smoke, his laughter echoing from everywhere and nowhere. The blood moon rises in 2 weeks, Your Majesty. Decide which of you loves the others enough to die for them, because someone will die. The only question is whether it will be 1 soul or 4. Then he was gone, and the candles blazed back to life. But the kneeling Lycans remained on the ground, trembling, and Nora felt her children moving in her womb with agitation that suggested even unborn, they had sensed the terrible presence. The next 2 weeks became a desperate race against time. Dominic sent urgent messages to every magical expert in the kingdom, and beyond witches, warlocks, seers, anyone who might know how to break a debt to an ancient entity. Nora spent days in the archives with Alara, searching through texts so old they had to be handled with enchanted gloves. The answer was always the same. Debts to entities that old, that powerful, could not be broken or negotiated. They could only be paid. Someone had to be sacrificed. As the blood moon drew closer, painting the night sky with increasingly crimson hues, both Dominic and Nora made the same secret decision. Both began planning to offer themselves as the willing sacrifice, to die so their mate and children could live. Neither told the other. Both believed they were being noble, making the ultimate sacrifice of love. Neither realized that Malachar and the entity he served had no intention of honoring any bargain. The blood moon wasn't about choice or sacrifice. It was about taking everything. The blood moon rose over the Lycanthian palace like a wound opening in the sky, its crimson light painting the ancient stones the color of fresh blood. Dominic stood in the palace's ritual chamber, a circular room deep beneath the throne hall, where crow kings had performed sacred ceremonies for 1,000 years. Nora had begged him not to do this, had pleaded, argued, even commanded, using the authority she'd earned as his queen. But Dominic had been immovable. He would perform the ritual of willing sacrifice, offer his soul to the entity, and save his mate and unborn children. He'd made Nora promise to stay in their chambers under heavy guard. She'd agreed. It was a lie, but she'd agreed. As Dominic began the ritual incantation, speaking words in the old tongue that tasted of ash and darkness, Malachar materialized from the shadows. His skeletal form seemed more solid tonight, as if the blood moon strengthened whatever dark magic animated him. "How noble," the sorcerer said, his voice dripping with mockery. "The brave king sacrificing himself for his family. How very predictable." He circled Dominic slowly. "Did you truly believe the entity would accept a willing sacrifice? That ancient darkness operates on such honorable terms?" Dominic's eyes widened with sudden, terrible understanding. "The ritual was never about choice," Malachar finished. "It was designed to take by force, to tear, to rip, to consume. The entity doesn't want a willing soul. It wants the pleasure of breaking one." Dark magic slammed into Dominic like a tidal wave of pure malevolence. He staggered, his hands clawing at his chest, as if he could physically tear out the darkness pouring into him. The entity, a being of pure malevolence, that had existed since before light touched the world, crashed into Dominic's consciousness with overwhelming force. Nora, despite her promise, had followed him to the ritual chamber. She stood in the doorway just as the possession began, and she felt the mate bond twist violently. It was like having her soul torn in half. The connection that had anchored her since that first night in the dungeon convulsed, severed, leaving a wound that made her scream. Dominic's golden eyes turned black as pitch. Not just the irises, but the entire eye, everything consumed by absolute darkness. His face, normally so warm when he looked at her, became a mask of cold malice. When he turned toward her, his voice was layered, ancient, terrible. "Hello, little Omega. The entity will have what it's owed, starting with you." Possessed Dominic moved with supernatural speed, lunging at Nora with claws extended, aiming for her swollen belly. Only her Omega instincts saved her. She dodged awkwardly, her pregnant belly making movement difficult, but she moved just enough that his claws tore through her dress instead of her flesh. "Protect the Queen!" Thomas's voice roared. The young guard threw himself between Nora and the possessed king with a dozen warriors. They lasted seconds. Dominic's supernatural power, amplified by the ancient entity, tore through them like they were made of paper. Guards flew through the air, bodies slamming into stone walls with sickening cracks. Blood painted the ritual chamber's ancient symbols. The palace erupted into chaos. Then the outer walls exploded inward. Lady Thorne arrived with her supernatural army like a plague given form. Creatures of shadow and nightmare poured through the breaches like hands twisted by dark sorcery. Their bodies warped into forms that were neither human nor wolf, but something nightmarish between. Commander Steele walked beside Lady Thorne, very much alive despite his supposed execution 3 months ago. His death had been faked through blood magic, a simulacrum taking his place while the real Steele fled to gather forces. "Find the Omega Queen!" Lady Thorne's voice rang out above the battle. "I want those twins cut from her womb before they're born. Their power will be ours." Thomas grabbed Nora's arm, his face bloody but determined. "We have to go, now." The secret passages. He pulled her through a hidden door, into passages that only the most loyal retainers knew existed. Behind them, Nora heard Dominic's roar of fury as the entity realized its prey was escaping. They ran through darkness, Thomas and 6 remaining guards surrounding Nora. Behind them, growing closer with terrifying speed, she heard destruction as possessed Dominic tore through the palace itself to reach her. The severed mate bond pulsed with agonizing pain, but it wasn't completely destroyed. Through the broken connection, Nora could feel Dominic's consciousness trapped inside his own body, screaming, fighting against the entity devouring him from within. The last thing Nora saw before Thomas pulled her into a hidden exit was Dominic's black eyes fixed on her through a collapsed wall, his body covered in the blood of loyal guards. The entity spoke with his voice, layered and terrible. "You cannot hide, little Omega. I will find you. I will find those prophesied children. And when I do, the entity will have what it's owed, 4 souls instead of 1. Then they were on horses, galloping into the night while the palace burned behind them and the blood moon painted everything the color of slaughter. The sanctuary was carved into the mountain itself, hidden so deep in the wilderness at the kingdom's farthest edge that even the most detailed maps didn't acknowledge its existence. It had been built generations ago during the last Great War, when the Crow bloodline faced extinction and needed a place where survivors could hide until the threat passed. Ancient wards layered the stone walls magic so old it had become part of the mountain, shielding the compound from detection. Nora arrived 3 days after fleeing the palace, exhausted and hollow-eyed, accompanied by Thomas and what remained of his elite guard, 6 warriors out of 20 who had started the journey. The others had died buying time, creating false trails, sacrificing themselves so their queen could reach safety. An elderly healer named Mira waited at the sanctuary's entrance, her weathered face creased with worry. She had served Dominic's mother decades ago and knew these mountains better than anyone living. And there was Sarah, a young Omega, barely 20 years old, who had insisted on coming despite the danger. "You'll need another Omega," Sarah had said simply when Thomas tried to refuse her. "For the birth, for understanding what you're going through. I'm coming." The sanctuary was cold, primitive, brutally isolated compared to the palace's comfort. Stone chambers lit by oil lamps instead of chandeliers, rough blankets instead of silk. Yet it was safe for now, and that was all that mattered. Nora struggled with devastating isolation that went beyond the physical. The severed mate bond left a wound in her soul that never stopped aching, a constant pain that made every breath hurt. She could still feel Dominic through the broken connection, not clearly, but enough. enough to feel his consciousness trapped inside his possessed body, screaming, fighting with everything he had against the entity devouring him from within. Some nights she woke up gasping, the bond pulsing with proximity that meant only one thing. He was getting closer. Hunting. The entity was using Dominic's bond sense, following the thread that still connected them despite being severed, tracking her across impossible distances. The pregnancy became complicated as the weeks passed. Carrying twins with such prophesied power took a physical toll that even Mira's extensive healing knowledge couldn't fully counter. Nora grew weaker even as her belly swelled, the babies drawing on her life force in ways that left her exhausted. Her skin became pale, almost translucent. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Mira examined her one evening and delivered the prognosis with brutal honesty. "You might not survive the birth, Your Majesty. Omega bodies weren't designed to carry this much concentrated magic. The twins are drawing more from you every day." "I'll survive," Nora said with certainty she didn't entirely feel. "These children are all I have left of Dominic. Their birth is the only thing that can save him. I will survive long enough to bring them into this world." Sarah became Nora's unexpected confidant during the long, isolated weeks. The young Omega would sit with her in the evenings, helping her walk the sanctuary's corridors for exercise. "You changed everything for us," Sarah said one night, her voice fierce. "Omegas throughout the kingdom, we watched you become queen, watch you stand beside the king as an equal. You showed us that our nature isn't weakness. You can't die, Your Majesty. We all need you to survive." As the weeks passed and her pregnancy advanced, Nora began to transform in ways that had nothing to do with her swelling belly. Stripped of everything except her will to protect her unborn children, she discovered powers she'd never known she possessed. Not gentle Omega soothing magic, but something fiercer maternal fury that made her dangerous despite her condition. When Thomas's scouts reported possible enemy sightings in the valleys below, Nora made a decision that shocked everyone. "Teach me to fight." "Your Majesty, you're 6 months pregnant, which means I have 2 months to learn enough to defend myself and my children if this sanctuary is breached," Nora interrupted. "I won't be helpless. Not again. Teach me." Thomas taught her, modified techniques that accounted for her pregnancy, focused on efficiency over strength. How to use a blade when you couldn't move quickly. Where to strike, to disable an attacker instantly. Nora practiced until her hands bled. She was becoming what she needed to be. A queen who could stand alone. A mother who would burn the world to protect her young. And every night, through the broken mate bond, she felt Dominic getting closer. 8 weeks into her exile, the sanctuary's wards began to fail. Nora felt it first, through her Omega senses, a gradual weakening of the ancient magic that had protected this place for generations. The protective barrier that should have been impenetrable was crumbling, worn down by Malakar's relentless assault. Each night, she could feel him working in the darkness, methodically breaking through protections that had stood for centuries, his dark magic like acid eating through the wards layer by layer. Worse, possessed Dominic was getting closer. Through the damaged mate bond, Nora felt him approaching with the inevitability of a coming storm. His consciousness was almost gone now, consumed by the entity until only the faintest spark of the man she loved remained. But that spark still fought, screaming, clawing, resisting with the last shreds of his will, even as the entity used his body to hunt his pregnant mate across impossible distances. Some nights Nora woke weeping, feeling Dominic's anguish through the bond, feeling him watch through black eyes as the entity forced his body to tear through anyone who stood between him and his prey. Each death, each act of violence, broke him further. Yet still he fought. Thomas received reports from scouts that made their situation even more desperate. Lady Thorne's army was sweeping through the mountains, systematically searching every valley, every cave, every possible hiding place. They were using dark magic to detect life forces, and Nora's twins, with their unprecedented, prophesied power, shone like beacons that couldn't be hidden forever. "We have a week at most," Thomas said grimly during a war council in Nora's chamber. Probably less. The search pattern is tightening. They're close. The small group of defenders began preparing for siege, with the grim efficiency of warriors who knew they were likely preparing for their deaths. 12 guards against an army. Impossible odds. But they were loyal to their queen, and they would die protecting her if necessary. Mira examined Nora that same evening and delivered news that was somehow both expected and devastating. The twins will be born within days. Your Majesty. Possibly sooner. The elderly healer's hands trembled as she checked Nora's vitals. The pregnancy can't continue, the babies are too powerful, and your body is failing. I estimate it will happen during the blood moon's peak, just as the prophecy foretold. Sarah immediately suggested they run again, find another hiding place, buy more time. But Nora refused, with a certainty that surprised even herself. I'm too weak to travel, she said, placing her hands on her swollen belly where the twins moved restlessly. Too close to labor. Even if we fled, they'd catch us on the road, and I'd give birth in the wilderness with no protection at all. She met their eyes, her voice steady despite her fear. And somehow, I know the prophecy demands this. The twins must be born here, during the blood moon, with enemies closing in. It's the only way the magic will work. It's the only way to break the possession and save Dominic. Thomas nodded slowly, accepting her decision with the respect due a queen who had earned his absolute loyalty. Then we make our stand here. 12 guards against an army. A dying queen about to give birth to prophesied children. Ancient wards failing. A possessed king hunting his own mate. It was madness. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of impossible that Nora had made her specialty. As the blood moon began to rise on the third night after that decision, painting the mountain peaks crimson, Nora's water broke. The contractions started immediately excruciating waves of pain, complicated by the magical power radiating from the twins. They weren't just being born. They were fighting to emerge, their prophesied magic responding to the blood moon's pull. Mira worked frantically, her healing knowledge tested beyond anything she'd experienced in 5 decades of practice. She'd never delivered babies with this much raw power concentrated in such small bodies. The sanctuary's ancient stone walls began to glow with the overflow of magical energy. Light pulsed from the rocks themselves, growing brighter with each contraction, making the hidden compound visible for miles. And in the distance, cutting through Nora's screams of labor, they heard it. Howls. Dozens of them, growing closer. The magical surge from the twins' imminent birth had done what months of searching couldn't. It had revealed their exact location like a flare in the darkness. The army had found them. Thomas grabbed his sword and ran for the sanctuary's entrance, shouting orders. The remaining guards took defensive positions with the calm efficiency of warriors who knew this was likely their last stand. In the chamber, Nora bore down as another contraction tore through her, and the walls glowed even brighter. The prophecy was unfolding exactly as foretold twins, born during the blood moon, with enemies at the gates and a possessed king closing in. The hunt was over. The final confrontation had begun. The sanctuary's wall exploded inward with a sound like the world breaking apart. Nora was in the middle of a contraction, her body racked with the agony of imminent birth, when the ancient wards shattered completely. She felt it through her omega senses, a psychic shockwave that made her gasp and clutch her swollen belly. The twins thrashed inside her, agitated by the sudden absence of protective magic that had cocooned them for weeks. Thomas burst through her chamber door, already armed, his face grim. They've found us. We have minutes, maybe less. How? Nora struggled against the pain of another contraction. The wards were supposed to be unbreakable. He's using the mate bond, Mira said, gathering medical supplies with shaking hands. The entity is stronger than whoever created these wards. It followed the connection between you and tore through the magic like it was cobwebs. The floor trembled. Somewhere above, in the sanctuary's upper levels, the sounds of battle erupted, steel clashing, magic crackling, warriors dying. The entity wasn't alone. Lady Thorne's forces had followed, and now both threats converged on this last refuge. Through the broken mate bond, Nora felt Dominic's presence like a crushing weight. He was here, so terribly close. And beneath the entity's malevolent control, she felt her mate's consciousness screaming in anguish, fighting with every shred of will to stop his body from hunting her. "Get the others to the escape tunnels," Nora commanded Thomas, her voice steady despite another contraction tearing through her. "Buy them time to flee." "Your Majesty, I can't leave you." "You can and you will. That's an order, Captain." Thomas's jaw clenched, but he nodded and was gone, shouting orders. Sarah refused to leave, and Mira stayed too, the elderly healer setting out instruments with steady hands despite the approaching destruction. Then the wall exploded inward. Dominic stood in the breach, backlit by crimson moonlight and fires burning in the sanctuary's upper chambers. His body was covered in blood, some his own from wounds that would have killed a normal Lycan, but the entity kept him moving beyond any natural endurance. His eyes were that terrible, endless black, and when he smiled, it was the entity's cruel amusement. "Found you," the layered voices said through his mouth. "Did you truly believe you could hide from me, little Omega? Your mate bond is a beacon. There is nowhere in this realm or any other where you could hide that I would not find you." Nora forced herself to stand straight, despite her terror, despite the pain, despite her advanced labor, making her vulnerable. She had spent 2 months transforming from a frightened girl into a queen who could stand alone. "You're not Dominic," she said steadily. "You're a parasite wearing the body of the man I love. And parasites can be removed." The entity laughed and lunged with supernatural speed. Nora moved on instinct, the combat training taking over. She wasn't fast enough, couldn't be in active labor, but she moved just enough that Dominic's claws tore through her shoulder instead of her throat. Pain exploded through her. Blood poured hot down her arm. But Nora struck back with the small blade she'd kept hidden, creating space to stumble backward. The broken mate bond suddenly flared. Through the entity's malevolent presence, Nora felt Dominic fighting back. Every time the entity made his body attack his laboring mate, some part of Dominic's will surged against the possession with renewed fury. "Dominic," Nora gasped. "I know you're in there. Don't give up." For just a second, the black in Dominic's eyes flickered. A flash of gold broke through the darkness, his body seized as two wills fought for control. The entity roared with fury, pouring more power into the possession, and the gold vanished beneath black again. But that second was enough. The mate bond, even severed and broken, was still Dominic's anchor. The entity lunged again, not at Nora, but at her belly, claws extended to tear the unborn twins from her womb before they could be born and break his control. Sarah threw herself in front of Nora with a scream. The young Omega had no combat training, nothing but desperate courage. Dominic's claws tore through her chest, and she crumpled with blood pouring from catastrophic wounds. "No!" Nora caught Sarah's falling body. The young Omega's eyes were already glazing. "Gave you time," Sarah whispered. "Save the..." She died in Nora's arms. The grief that exploded through Nora as Sarah died in her arms was primal, devastating, and it triggered something she'd never felt before. Her Omega magic, always gentle, always soothing, transformed in an instant. Maternal fury combined with Omega power became something else entirely, a force that made the very air shimmer with heat. When Nora looked up at the entity wearing her mate's body, her eyes glowed with silver light, the mark of an Omega pushed beyond all limits, accessing magic that existed only in the oldest stories. "You made a mistake," Nora said, her voice layered with harmonics that matched the entity's terrible resonance. "You killed someone under my protection. And an Omega defending her pack, her children, her people, there is no force in any world more dangerous." She rose, laying Sarah's body gently down, and faced the ancient entity with power blazing around her like starlight made solid. The sanctuary chamber filled with light that had no earthly source, silver radiance that poured from Nora's body like liquid moonlight. Mira stumbled backward, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of power radiating from her queen. Even through the possession, Dominic's body took an involuntary step back. "Impossible," the layered voices hissed. "Omegas are gentle, soft. They do not have power to—" "You know nothing of Omegas," Nora interrupted. "You think gentleness equals weakness, that the choice not to destroy means inability to do so." Her hands moved to her swollen belly, and the twins responded with their own prophesied magic. "We are the balance to alpha strength. And when you threaten our children, our pack, we become the most dangerous force in any realm." The Omega magic swirling around her wasn't soft healing energy. This was something primordial, as old as the first mother protecting her young, as fierce as the moon that governed all Lycan kind. It built in waves, each stronger than the last, burning through her pregnant, weakened body. She didn't care. Sarah was dead. Dominic was possessed. Her children's lives hung in the balance. She would burn herself to ash if that's what it took. The entity struck first, but Nora's Omega power caught Dominic mid-lunge, wrapping around the possessed king like chains of solid light. His body froze mid-air, suspended. Through the mate bond, Nora gasped, understanding flooding through her. Even broken, it responds to Omega power. Your possession is foreign to him. The bond recognizes me, recognizes what we are to each other. She poured more energy into the connection, feeling Dominic's consciousness trapped, screaming, but still fighting. "Dominic," she called through the bond with pure emotion. "I need you to fight. Fight for me, for our children, for every moment we've shared and every future we planned. Don't let this thing win." Deep inside the prison of his possessed body, Dominic felt her call like a lifeline thrown into drowning darkness. Nora's voice, her love, her faith, her Omega magic wrapping around his consciousness, gave him something to fight for. He pushed back against the possession with everything he had. The physical toll on Nora was catastrophic. Blood ran from her nose, her ears. The twins thrashed with distress, sending cramps through her belly, labor intensifying, her body responding to the massive magical strain. "Your Majesty, you'll kill yourself," Mira screamed. "Then I'll die saving him." The entity realized its mistake. It hadn't understood the mate bond, that true mates were two halves of one soul, that the connection existed deeper than physical possession. The wall behind Nora exploded again. Thomas and 6 warriors emerged from a hidden tunnel, their loyalty overriding orders to flee. They threw themselves between Nora and the possessed king. "For the Queen!" Thomas roared. "Hold the line!" They couldn't win, but they could buy time. Nora, laboring and bleeding and burning herself out, made one final choice. She let go, released her grip on the Omega chains, let her power collapse inward instead of projecting outward. And in that moment, she poured everything, all her love, all her faith, all her desperate hope, directly into the mate bond, not trying to control or fight, just loving him, reminding him of who he was, showing him what he was fighting for. In the darkness, Dominic felt his mate's unconditional love crash over him like a tsunami of light, felt her life force guttering, felt their children being born, felt everything he'd ever wanted slipping away while this parasite used his body to destroy it all. And something inside him, something fundamental to his nature, as an alpha, as a mate, as a father, broke the entity's chains from within. His eyes flickered from black to gold, stayed gold, and when he screamed, it was his voice, only his voice, raw with agony and fury, and love so fierce it shattered the possession. The entity was expelled in a shriek that shattered windows, manifesting as shadow that writhed in pain. But without a physical vessel, it began to dissipate, pulled back toward whatever dark dimension had spawned it. "This isn't over," the fading voice promised. "The debt is still owed." Then silence. Dominic collapsed beside his laboring mate, his body ruined, but his eyes golden again, full of anguish as he gathered her carefully into his arms. "The twins," Nora gasped. "They're coming. "I know, love. I know." Dominic looked up desperately at Thomas. "Get Mira. Get anyone who can help. Now." Mira was already there, her hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the chaos. The sanctuary chamber had become a makeshift birthing room, warriors holding torches for light, guards standing watch at the destroyed walls as Lady Thorne's forces closed in. "Push, Your Majesty," Mira commanded. "These children need you to push." Nora pushed, screaming with effort, and the first twin emerged into Dominic's waiting hands. A boy. Small, weeks premature, but alive in the moment he entered the world. Power radiated from his tiny body in waves that made every Lycan in the sanctuary fall to their knees in instinctive submission. His eyes, when they opened, glowed with golden light. "He's perfect," Dominic breathed, passing the child to Mira with trembling hands. "Nora, he's—" But there was no time for wonder. The second twin was coming, and Nora's body was failing. Her heartbeat stuttered. Her breathing came in shallow gasps. Blood loss was catastrophic. "Stay with me," Dominic begged, gripping her hand. "One more. Just one more. Then you can rest. Please, love, please." The second child came in a rush, a girl, even smaller than her brother. And for one terrible moment, she didn't cry. Mira cleared her airways, rubbed her tiny chest, breathed life into impossibly small lungs. Then, finally, a thin wail emerged. Her eyes glowed silver omega magic in its purest form. "Two perfect children," Mira said through tears. "Your Majesties, you have a son and daughter, the prophesied twins." Nora's eyes rolled back, and her body went limp. "No!" Dominic's roar shook the walls. "Nora! Nora!" Mira thrust the twins into Thomas's arms and turned to the dying queen, pressing points meant to stimulate life force, pouring healing magic into Nora's failing body. But it was hopeless. No healing could recover from this much blood loss, this much magical exhaustion. "She's gone beyond what I can heal," Mira said gently. "I'm sorry." "Then take from me," Dominic snarled. "I'm an Alpha King. I have life force to spare. Take it. Take all of it if necessary. I don't care if it kills me. Save her. Save her." The mate bond severed during possession suddenly flared back to life, not from Nora, but from the twins. Their combined power, Alpha and Omega, in perfect balance, recognized their parents' bond and instinctively reached out to repair it. Light golden and silver intertwined erupted from the infants and lanced through both Dominic and Nora. The mate bond snapped back into place with force that made them both scream. Dominic felt Nora slipping away, and he did exactly what his instincts demanded. He poured his life force through the bond with reckless abandon. Everything he had, everything he was, he shoved through the connection. "Take it," he gasped. "All of it, love. I can't exist in a world without you. If you die, I die, so take my life and live." Nora's consciousness, falling into darkness, felt her mate's life force flooding into her like sunlight after endless night. Felt the mate bond restored, felt their children's power supporting both of them, and she made a choice not to surrender, but to fight. One more time. Her heart stuttered, caught, beat, once, twice, found rhythm. Her lungs expanded with a gasping breath. When her eyes opened, gold meeting gold, the relief on Dominic's face broke through the last of her pain. "You're alive," he breathed. Then he collapsed beside her, unconscious from draining himself completely, but alive. The twins, cradled in Thomas's arms, stopped crying simultaneously. Their glowing eyes, one golden, one silver, looked at their unconscious parents with impossible awareness. Then they closed their eyes and slept. Outside the chamber, Lady Thorne's forces breached the sanctuary's entrance, but they stopped abruptly. The power radiating from the newborn twins was so overwhelming, so absolute, that even dark magic practitioners felt instinctive terror. This was prophesied power, made manifest children, who could unite or destroy the world. Lady Thorne herself appeared in the doorway, Her face twisted with fury and fear as she saw the twins in Thomas's protective arms. She raised her hands to strike with dark magic. The twins' eyes opened simultaneously. Golden and silver light erupted from their tiny bodies, not attacking, but simply existing with such concentrated power that Lady Thorne's magic dissolved like smoke. She stumbled backward, her army retreating in panic from power they couldn't comprehend or combat. "Impossible," Mira whispered, checking both unconscious parents. "They should both be dead, but they're alive." The twins healed the bond, anchored them both to life. The prophecy was fulfilled. The twice-born had entered the world during the blood moon, their birth breaking an ancient possession and restoring a mate bond that should have been destroyed. Unity or destruction, the path was still unwritten, but they had survived to face whatever came next. Together, 3 weeks after the twins' impossible birth, Nora stood before a war council, with her newborn son cradled in one arm and her daughter in the other, looking every inch the warrior queen she had become. The sanctuary had become a fortress in the days following the birth. Word of the twins' power, how their mere existence had driven Lady Thorne's army into retreat, spread through the supernatural world faster than any messenger could travel. Loyal houses that had hidden during the siege began emerging, pledging their forces to the true king and queen. Pacts that had remained neutral declared for the Crow bloodline. Even witch covens sent representatives, offering magical support. But Nora had changed in ways that went beyond motherhood. The Omega who had nearly died giving birth had emerged from that ordeal transformed, no longer just gentle and compassionate, but tempered with steel. She had faced an ancient entity, channeled power that should have destroyed her, and brought prophesied children into a world actively trying to kill them. She was done being hunted, done hiding. "We march on the palace in 3 days," Nora announced, her voice carrying authority that made even the most seasoned warriors straighten. "Lady Thorne has occupied our home for too long. She's terrorized our people, corrupted our court, and tried to murder our children. This ends now." Dominic, still recovering from the possession's toll on his body, looked at his mate with pride and fierce love. "The queen is right. We've been in exile while a pretender sits on our throne. No more." The army that assembled over the next 3 days was unlike anything the kingdom had seen. Traditional Lycan warriors marched alongside Omega volunteers who had been inspired by their queen's courage. Witch covens provided magical support. Even vampires from the Eastern Territory's ancient rivals sent a contingent, recognizing that the prophesied twins represented something larger than old grudges. Nora rode at the front beside Dominic, the twins secured in specially crafted carriers that allowed her to keep them close. Some advisors had argued the children should stay behind, protected in the sanctuary. Nora had refused with finality that permitted no debate. "They are the future of this kingdom," she said. "The people need to see them, need to know what we're fighting for. My children stay with me." The march took 2 days. When they crested the final hill, and the palace came into view, Nora's heart clenched. Her home, the place where she'd transformed from servant to queen, was draped in Lady Thorne's banners, corrupted by the woman who had orchestrated so much suffering. Lady Thorne met them at the palace gates, with what remained of her forces. Dark practitioners, mercenaries, the few noble houses corrupt or foolish enough to support her claim. She looked older than Nora remembered, her features twisted by dark magic and desperation. "You should have stayed hidden, little Omega," Lady Thorne called out. "You may have survived the entity, but you won't survive me. Surrender those twins, and I'll grant you a quick death." Nora urged her horse forward, alone, until she was close enough to meet Lady Thorne's eyes. The twins stirred in their carriers, and golden and silver light began to pulse, faintly responding to their mother's emotions, to the threat before them. "I was a servant you tried to murder by throwing me into a dungeon with what you thought was a feral beast," Nora said, her voice steady and cold. "I survived. I became queen. I broke an unbreakable curse. I stood against an ancient entity and won. I gave birth to the prophesied twins while you tried to cut them from my womb." She smiled, and there was nothing gentle in it. "What makes you think you're the threat that finally breaks me?" The Omega power radiating from her made the air shimmer. Behind her, the combined army stood ready. Dominic's alpha dominance joined with her Omega strength, their restored mate bond visible as intertwined golden and silver light. Lady Thorne's forces began to waver. Some dropped their weapons outright. They had signed up to fight for power and wealth, not to stand against a queen who had become legend and twins whose very birth had rewritten the rules of magic. Last chance, Nora said. Surrender now, face justice, and live, or fight, and learn exactly how dangerous an Omega mother protecting her children can be. Lady Thorne's answer was to raise her hands and hurl dark magic directly at the twins. The attack never reached them. The twins' eyes opened simultaneously, golden and silver blazing, and their combined power created a shield so absolute that Lady Thorne's magic simply ceased to exist. The backlash hit her like a physical force, sending her sprawling. Impossible, she gasped. They're infants, they can't. They're prophesied, Dominic said, his voice carrying across the battlefield. Born of a true mate bond, children of a queen who refused to break, and a king who fought possession from within. They are everything you feared they would be. The remaining defenders laid down their weapons. The siege was over before it truly began. Nora rode through the palace gates, with her children and her mate, reclaiming her throne not through violence, but through the sheer weight of everything she had survived to reach this moment. The kingdom had its true rulers back, and the prophesied twins had come home,